the narrative begins with a sudden explosion of brilliant light flooding the screen. A cursor, reminiscent of a computer interface, glides over what seems to be a battlefield, indicating that the unfolding scenes are part of a game. Nonetheless, the conflict rages on, portraying a fierce struggle between two factions, one honoring a deity named Nebula and the other devout to a god called Hegemonia. Each faction plunges into intense warfare, displaying distinct specialties and tactics. The purported gods exert influence over their followers akin to players manipulating pieces on a chessboard. However, the player's autonomy extends beyond that of chess, enabling them to execute powerful maneuvers like launching nuclear assaults on the battlefield. Player Nebula, having given the green light, unleashes multiple nuclear warheads toward the enemy's domain. Yet, player Hegemonia remains unruffled. Having foreseen this development, he swiftly counters by deploying tower-like structures resembling interceptor missiles, proving remarkably effective in neutralizing the incoming threat. As the missiles instantly were blown up, but that was within his calculations, the enemy's defense system proved insufficient to counter his calculated move, leaving a solitary missile unscathed. It hurtled towards the heart of the enemy's imperial palace, where a multitude of orcs fervently prayed for divine intervention. In our reality, such prayers might seem futile, but within the lost world, faith and devotion always wield tangible power, producing meaningful outcomes. Just as the people's unwavering faith summoned a spirit, halting the nuclear assault on their land, Nebula remained unsurprised. He had anticipated this tactic from his adversary, considering it a predictable move within the current meta, the Holy Oak strategy. Hegemonia, who ranked second in the server, openly boasted about this strategy, even mocking Nebula for his failed attempt. However, Nebula couldn't fault Hegemonia for coming out with such confidence. Because this strategy was inherently overpowered, leveraging the orc race's rapid population growth facilitated swift accumulation of faith resources. Consequently, advancements in science, technology, and culture were expedited through strategic invasions. This approach garnered consistently positive feedback due to the significant faith accumulation and the sheer numerical advantage of the orc forces in warfare. Moreover, the opponent's decision to focus on the Sky Realm demonstrated awareness of Nebula's skill set, particularly their proficiency in science development, which limited the effectiveness of their aerial arsenal. They went as far as to clandestinely prepare for countering his nuclear assault, foreseeing the rapid summoning capability of a high-caliber spirit chain apostle. Yet, Nebula remained unimpressed, deeming this response too predictable. Despite his opponent's expansive territorial reach, extending even into the skies, he viewed it merely as space above their heads. His solution was simple: to possess a weapon surpassing these limits. With this insight, Nebula had readied an AI-operated military satellite crafted from ancient relics, armed with the formidable rods from God. Even Hegemonia was taken aback upon realizing that Nebula wielded such a weapon. Unforeseen after the nuclear strike, Nebula unleashed a HIMARS weapon even more devastating than its predecessor. In the face of this onslaught, Hegemonia could only scream at Nebula to cease, but Nebula paid no heed to his opponent's pleas. With indifference to his adversary's desires, he allowed his assault to persist, viewing the tungsten rods as insignificant projectiles. Despite Hegemonia's desperate attempt to block the attack with his spirit chain apostle, Nebula remained confident in its inevitable failure. The rods, accumulating gravitational acceleration, achieved speeds approximately 10 times that of sound. With unstoppable momentum, the rod effortlessly pierced through the apostle like a knife through butter. Upon impact with the ground, it unleashed a devastating force, comparable to that of a nuclear weapon. Indeed, without the nuclear aftermath, the Emperor met his demise, leading to the collapse of the underground temple and the imperial palace. Consequently, the faith that Hegemonia had meticulously built vanished, causing the apostles to fade away. With this turn of events, Nebula emerged victorious, maintaining his status as the game's top ranker. Before departing, he adhered to gaming etiquette by courteously bidding Hegemonia GG. However, Hegemonia, unable to accept defeat gracefully, revealed himself to be a sore loser, insisting on another round. He brazenly declared that this defeat would mark the beginning of his winning streak. Unfazed by Hegemonia's boasts, Nebula calmly declined his demand, remaining unmoved as ever. Despite a lingering curiosity about whether Hegemonia harbored additional tricks, Nebula's tenure as the top ranker had granted him a deep understanding of the game's mechanics. He was confident that Hegemonia held no surprises that could catch him off guard. Having exhausted all available achievements and maintained his dominance in the rankings, Nebula recognized that the game held nothing new for him. With a sense of finality, he made the gradual decision to retire from playing. To his surprise, a message suddenly appeared on his screen, initially sparking irritation at the interruption. Who dared to bother him at this hour? Yet, curiosity ultimately prevailed, prompting him to open the message. What greeted him was unexpected: praise and congratulations for being the sole player to have cleared all achievements. The game expressed genuine appreciation for his dedication to and enjoyment of the Lost World thus far. The unexpected message left him bewildered. Typically, such announcements were reserved for the end of a game's service. However, given the game's immense popularity, it seemed unlikely. Intrigued, he clicked further to uncover the source of this sudden communication. To his astonishment, it unveiled that the game he had been immersed in was merely an early beta version. It was now scheduled for an official release. As the top player, Nebula was granted a rare opportunity to enjoy the game before its public launch. Driven by his thirst to explore all the game had to offer, he accepted their offer without hesitation. With that decision, he found himself instantly engulfed in a sea of binary codes, where endless streams of ones and zeros floated around him. Not a moment had passed before darkness enveloped him, and soon after, the emptiness gave way to reveal countless stars strewn across the expanse. Beneath those celestial bodies stood a familiar figure, Nebula's game avatar. As he opened his eyes, light cascaded down, mirroring the breathtaking spectacle above him. It was a sight far removed from anything he had experienced in the game, a blend of beauty and desolation. Stone columns, reminiscent of Greek temples, encircled the area, lending it an ancient and rugged charm. However, the peculiarity lay in the sky. Despite the visible horizon, it remained an abyss of blackness. The absence of an atmosphere was evident. One couldn't survive without it. As Nebula assessed himself, he realized he inhabited the very body of the character he had been playing. Assuming it all to be a vivid dream, he rose to his feet, only to be interrupted by the unexpected approach of a mysterious figure from behind. Dismissing it as a mere figment of his imagination, he was swiftly corrected. This was no dream. The enigmatic woman, draped in an ethereal robe, explained that he had been chosen for a purpose. Before he could gather his thoughts to respond, she warmly addressed him by his real name, Sung-Woon. Introducing herself as Aldine, she left him grappling with a flood of questions. How did she know his real name? Who was she? And what did she mean by chosen? Before he could voice his inquiries, shadows materialized before his eyes. Initially startled, he soon realized that these silhouettes belonged to ordinary people, individuals who, like him, appeared bewildered by their surroundings. Noticing Nebula's perceptiveness, Aldine proceeded to elucidate the mystery shrouding the shadows. They all hailed from the same world, a precaution taken to ensure fairness, as there was a possibility of them recognizing one another. To maintain anonymity, they had been veiled in shadows. However, this explanation didn't address their current predicament. Without further ado, Aldine cut to the chase. With a gesture, she unveiled Earth before them. Yet, upon closer inspection, the continents displayed were unfamiliar, distinct from those of Earth. It was a landscape they had encountered countless times, a definitive sign that they were indeed on the planet of the Lost World. In this vast realm, the players had ascended to the status of true gods. The revelation left everyone astonished. Despite the absence of audible reactions from other players, Nebula keenly sensed a collective unease, a silent acknowledgement of the cringeworthy nature of Aldine's statement. The dialogue seemed reminiscent of an edgelord's proclamation. Nonetheless, with little else to occupy their attention, they remained attentive to Aldine's words. She proceeded to unveil a revelation. The lost world they were familiar with wasn't merely a virtual game environment but a forsaken realm abandoned by the gods following a past calamity. Once, it had thrived with a diverse array of races living in harmony. However, for reasons unknown, the gods had forsaken it. Now, the time had come for new deities to ascend. The game they had played was crafted with the explicit purpose of identifying suitable candidates to reign over this forsaken land. Merely by participating, they had the chance to transcend moral limitations and become gods themselves. Essentially, it mirrored the mechanics of the lost world they had played. Initially, only lowly creatures would believe in them, but by increasing their number of followers, they could ascend to become the sole god of the planet. The world would then be theirs to command, fulfilling their every desire. It was an unprecedented opportunity, yet Nebula couldn't shake the feeling that Aldine was withholding something crucial. With a sense of caution, he inquired about the repercussions of giving up. To his surprise, Aldine revealed that should they choose to forfeit, they would simply return to their mundane daily lives, with their memories of this place conveniently erased. As Nebula inquired if the same rules applied for giving up mid-challenge, his suspicions were confirmed. They weren't so generous as to allow such an easy exit. This prompted Nebula to pose another question: what would happen if he were to be defeated by other gods? Aldine's response was simple yet ominous: he would meet a godly end, and they would welcome it. This outcome was exactly what Nebula had anticipated. In a game where the victor could attain everything, it was logical that participants would have to stake their lives. If this real-world competition mirrored the mechanics of the game The Lost World, participants might have to risk more than just their lives. However, rather than deter him, this prospect only brought a smile to Nebula's face. The thrill of risking their lives heightened the game's allure, leaving him with no reason to give up now. With clarification provided to all players, Aldine invited those intending to give up to step forward and notify her. For those ready to embrace the challenge, she presented them with cards, each representing a small area where their journey would commence. Observing the unfolding events, Nebula couldn't help but recognize the similarities to the game. The process of selecting a starting area mirrored that of the game. However, his contemplation was interrupted as he noticed a growing number of people opting to give up. What began with a few individuals quickly spread to others. Nebula took a moment to assess the remaining participants. The initial count of people transported to this place matched the maximum number of players The Lost World could accommodate for a single match, 32. With 27 individuals left, the competition to become the sole god of this world remained fierce. His thoughts were once again interrupted, this time by the mysterious woman, who requested him to choose a card first. It dawned on Nebula that the order of card selection likely corresponded to the participants' ranks. And so he stepped forward to take the honor of being the first to choose. As Nebula lifted the card, his eyes widened in shock at the sight of the small area assigned to him. Before he could utter a word, he found himself instantly transported into the Lost World, arriving in his designated location. A picturesque scene unfolded before him, lush greenery and a babbling stream, teeming with diverse creatures. However, these inhabitants were unlike anything found on Earth. For instance, a creature resembling a frog displayed a muscular physique reminiscent of a beast, yet maintained the gentle disposition of a golden retriever as it happily hunted for fish. Amidst this vibrant tableau, a blue butterfly, radiating an aura of mystery, fluttered past. To Nebula's surprise, this butterfly was his familiar, a companion bestowed upon him by the card's selection. He had been assigned the small area of insects, a category encompassing various arthropods and crustaceans. Among the 32 potential small areas, this was his unique designation. Despite insects having the lowest winning rate according to the actual data, Nebula remained undeterred. He firmly believed that success depended on how one utilized their resources. Besides, being backward compatible with birds, the insect category proved to be quite versatile, especially in the early stages of the game. However, a new challenge arose. Nebula found himself at a disadvantageous starting point on the eastern end of the continent. This location hindered his ability to advance, resulting in fewer early engagements and making it nearly impossible to gain benefits through early confrontations. Consequently, his usual aggressive strategy was rendered unviable. In light of these circumstances, Nebula recognized the importance of selecting a race that fed on insects, such as the frogmen. However, his concern lay with the number of tribes. In the Lost World, a god's influence over creatures was directly proportional to the level of faith it commanded. Unfortunately, larger groups tended to disregard minor miracles. Indeed, while gaining a large tribe initially seemed advantageous, the risk of expending all 10 faith points without yielding any tangible results was too great. Moreover, this limited amount of faith points was insufficient to exert any meaningful influence over the group of frogmen. With this realization, Nebula began to search for alternative options, leading him to a more desolate area where a small group of lizard men roamed aimlessly. This species presented another promising candidate, as lizard men were also insect eaters and possessed the ability to survive in extreme conditions. Unlike the frogmen, he felt a stronger pull to observe them closely, noticing how their numbers had slightly dwindled, which aligned perfectly with Nebula's desired count. To his surprise, the group included the sick and elderly, indicating they were part of the original faction. It dawned on him that they were likely expelled during a power struggle, stranded in the desert. At the rear of the group, a young, wounded lizard man stood out. This scenario played into Nebula's hands, as his sense of isolation heightened, fueling his yearning for a glimmer of hope. Fragile though he was, he resolved to aid the injured lizard. As the lizard men trudged on through the desolate landscape, exhaustion etched across their faces. Fortunately, they stumbled upon a wounded gazelle along their path, prompting an immediate rush towards it. Starved for meat after a prolonged period, they descended upon the gazelle with savage hunger, while the wounded and elderly watched from the sidelines. In a matter of moments, the once lively gazelle disappeared, leaving behind only bones. Nevertheless, the healthy lizard men intended to consume every last bit, recognizing the delicious bone marrow within. Before they could proceed, Jael, another member of their kind, intervened, snatching the bones and insisting they had enough, urging them to leave the remains for those unable to hunt. Despite being mere bones, the injured and elderly were grateful, holding no resentment toward the others and fully understanding their circumstances. However, unlike the weaker lizards, the healthy ones questioned Jael's decision. They were not concerned about giving leftovers to the old or young, but it was evident that the wounded lizard was on the brink of death, his rotting wound a clear sign of his impending demise. It was almost miraculous that he was still alive. Despite the grave state he was in, Rakrak should have succumbed by now. His ability to persevere without lagging behind baffled the others. Yet, Jael remained resolute. The conviction stemmed not just from sympathy but from Rakrak's bravery. He was the sole lizard man who confronted a saber-toothed tiger while others fled. Thanks to Rakrak, the group suffered no further harm beyond his own injuries. Without his courageous act, many would have perished or sustained injuries, potentially leading to the group's collapse. While the others acknowledged and valued Rakrak's contribution, the harsh truth remained: he was nearing death, and resources were scarce. Jael admonished them, branding them shamelessly ungrateful, but they paid little heed, prioritizing logical reasoning. Despite their arguments, they ultimately yielded to Jael's rationale, evident in Rakrak's continued presence within the group. However, despite their proximity, Rakrak remained isolated in a corner. Due to his injuries, Rakrak found it difficult to sleep comfortably. However, this discomfort led him to notice a blue butterfly fluttering above him. Intrigued, he followed its path and discovered it led to the top of a hill, bathed in an ethereal light. With nothing else to occupy his time, Rakrak stood up and followed the mysterious light. Observing him walk in the dead of night led others to assume he was finally departing from the group. Nonetheless, since it was his own decision, no one intervened, all eyes fixed on his next move. Meanwhile, Rakrak clung to the last semblance of purpose in his harsh existence, to pursue this glimmer of hope. However, as he ascended, doubts crept in. Was this merely a figment of his imagination? The fact that he was the sole witness seemed to confirm this possibility. Even if there was significance to what he witnessed, he pondered where it would lead him. His questions were swiftly answered as he reached the hill's summit, greeted by a surprising sight: a towering mound of beetles, ample to satisfy the group's hunger. This unexpected bounty prompted a system message to appear before Nebula, indicating that the lizard men perceived this event as a miracle. Nebula was relieved to witness their acknowledgement and delight in his gift. The next step was to make them realize that the miracle was performed by Nebula and to acquaint them with his name, his divine identity. Surprisingly, it seemed unnecessary as Rakrak took it upon himself to announce the miracle. This was understandable, as individuals with strong willpower often handle matters autonomously. Unexpectedly, they chose to acknowledge his divinity as the nameless beetle god. While surprising, Nebula accepted it, though he had expected them to name him after the butterfly, given its role in guiding them thus far. Nevertheless, beetle god sufficed, understanding that great names are not inherent but earned over time. As Nebula looked upon them, he couldn't help but smile, recognizing Rakrak's significance to him, a sentiment reciprocated by Rakrak. The following day, Rakrak once again spotted butterflies, prompting contemplation on whether to follow them again. Meanwhile, his lizard kin were excited at the prospect, interpreting it as a sign of forthcoming sustenance. However, this time, Rakrak hesitated to immediately pursue his fantasy. They owed a great debt to the swarms of beetles, yet considering the situation from another angle, following the beetles could lead them into a trap. Especially with winter approaching, beetles typically emerge from the cold north. Heading in that direction would likely result in freezing to death. Upon hearing Rakrak's reasoning, the others swiftly changed their minds about feasting on beetles and opted to go in a different direction. Despite this logical solution, Rakrak felt uncertain. He realized there was nothing in the opposite direction either, but he also admitted he had no idea what purpose lay in the fantasy he was witnessing. For now, he felt compelled to follow it, lacking any other viable options. Meanwhile, Nebula observed everything and noticed their waning faith. However, he understood that this was just the beginning, so it was natural for them to have doubts. There was little he could do, but if he had a preference, he'd prefer a leader grounded in logic rather than one blinded by faith. Nevertheless, if Rakrak continued to believe in him, Nebula was determined to lead Rakrak to a future beyond his wildest imagination. True to his desire, Rakrak's tribe followed the path Nebula had laid out for them, ascending a small hill that loomed over the wilderness. As they climbed, their eyes widened in disbelief at the sight before them. Unable to contain his own astonishment, Rakrak turned to the group and declared that the nameless beetle god had once again bestowed upon them a miracle, a sanctuary. Thick foliage encircled a wide spring, from which gentle waterfalls and streams flowed. Overwhelmed with joy, the group erupted in cheers, celebrating the glimmer of hope for survival brought forth by their belief in Rakrak's decisions. Simultaneously, Nebula's divinity level rose to level 2, and his small area level increased to 2, as well. With this, the ability Blessings of Bugs became available. This skill was of utmost importance, as in the game The Lost World, leveling up the small area allowed players to grant special abilities to believers. Known as God's Blessing, this ability enabled believers to evolve, with the changes in appearance passed down to their descendants. Trusting his instincts, Nebula decided to bless Rakrak and appoint him as his priest, allowing him to convey Nebula's will to their people. A few moments later, as day turned to night, the lizard men slumbered peacefully beneath the clear night sky. Now that Rakrak held the position of priest, Nebula could enter his dreams and reveal himself in a more familiar form resembling Rakrak's species. With many questions swirling in Rakrak's mind, Nebula gestured for Rakrak to hold his hand. Yet, Rakrak's keen intuition led him to understand that wasn't what Nebula desired, so he remained still. Observing this, Nebula redirected his hand to point at something below. To Rakrak's astonishment, he found himself holding a buffalo's skull, effortlessly lifting it and placing it atop the head of the nameless beetle god. Suddenly, the image of their god became clear to him. Upon the arrival of day, Rakrak gathered everyone and recounted every detail of his dream. The more insightful lizard men deduced that the message of the beetle god was clear: a buffalo sacrifice was requested. However, hunting a buffalo meant venturing deep into the wilderness, a risk deemed too great by Jael. However, the others held a different opinion from Jael's cautious approach. They believed they had a duty to fulfill since the one who led them to the sanctuary had personally requested it. Despite this reasoning, Jael remained steadfast in decision, unwilling to jeopardize the safety of the pack. While they understood her perspective, they suggested that perhaps all hunters should step forward to join the hunt. Jael immediately disagreed, deeming it a foolish suggestion. Jael pointed out that if all hunters were to join, who would be left to protect the weaker members? This argument left the others unable to propose any viable alternatives, leaving them in a predicament. To their surprise, Rakrak also agreed with Jael's concern. Despite being a great leader, he was unwilling to endanger the entire pack. Instead, he proposed going alone. This suggestion instantly surprised everyone, including Jael, who knew firsthand the near impossibility of hunting a buffalo solo. Seeing their concern, Rakrak clarified that his decision wasn't based on recklessness but on a divine blessing. Initially confused, Jael prompted Rakrak to explain further. Rakrak recounted encountering another unbelievable miracle. Upon awakening, his wounds had completely healed, and his shoulders were now covered with black scales, resembling those of a beetle. Witnessing this transformation with their own eyes, Jael admitted that it was indeed strange. However, Jael maintained that this wasn't reason enough for Rakrak to hunt buffalo alone, a sentiment Rakrak agreed with. The real reason, Rakrak explained, was the immense strength he had gained. To demonstrate his newfound strength, Rakrak hurled a spear at a nearby tree with such force that it shattered upon impact, leaving only the bark behind. This display left all the lizard men in shock and disbelief. The sheer power exhibited exceeded their capabilities, leading them to inquire if Rakrak had been concealing this extraordinary power. Despite it being a lifeless tree, the showcased strength was undeniable, revealing that the Rakrak they thought they knew had undergone a remarkable transformation. As they marveled at Rakrak's newfound skill, their intended prey emerged on the horizon and sprinted towards them. Seizing the opportunity, Rakrak announced it with enthusiasm, leaving the lizard men in shock. They couldn't believe such a coincidence, as herds of buffalo typically followed predictable routes and rarely deviated from them. However, it seemed their previous argument was rendered moot, as it appeared their god truly desired that offering. Without hesitation, Rakrak charged towards the herd of buffalo and skillfully hurled his spear into their midst. With precision, the first buffalo, once feared by the lizard men, fell before their eyes. This boosted the lizardmen's morale, and they eagerly joined Rakrak in a unified attack on the buffalo. As night fell once again, the countless buffalo lay slain, their bones fashioned into an altar with a whole buffalo atop it, ready to be offered to the nameless beetle god. With Rakrak's eloquence, he uttered the appropriate words to consecrate the offering, and the others followed suit. Although the ritual appeared sloppy and clumsy to Nebula's eyes, the sincerity behind it was what truly mattered. Thus, Nebula gained faith beyond his expectations. As a novice priest, it was a decent rite, and he deemed the time invested worthwhile. While Nebula couldn't directly control the buffalo, as he wasn't the god of the wild grass they consumed, he enlisted the help of his other friends, the grasshoppers, setting them up as a trap. Once the buffalo consumed the grasshoppers, he somehow managed to exert control over them. However, they eventually resorted to eating the baby buffalo as well, a reasonable but lamentable act given their limited knowledge and skills. Despite their ignorance and primitive nature, Nebula realized that the population support of the oasis was not very high, with its limits likely reached within a few years. In their current state, lacking knowledge of farming or ranching, they would struggle to endure calamity. Nevertheless, Nebula understood that acquiring such knowledge was challenging, and it wasn't appropriate to directly intervene, as it violated the law of causality. But there is still hope, albeit requiring time and effort. Nebula realizes that the first step is to bestow a blessing. With this decision, another light shines towards Rakrak. In the following days, the altar they had previously built grew larger as they hunted more buffalo. However, the most surprising change was the significant transformation undergone by Rakrak and his men due to the blessing bestowed by Nebula. They now bore black scales resembling the beetles they had consumed. Despite this transformation, Rakrak was troubled by a disturbing dream he had the previous night. The vision was ambiguous, depicting the altar, once a symbol of prosperity, now shaking precariously. The pond of blessings, which had protected them for years, had lost its vitality, devoid of fish, and the ground had become parched, unable to sustain root plants. While the dream seemed dire, Jael reassured Rakrak that it would be a long time before such events occurred, emphasizing their belief that the god would take care of them. Rakrak agreed, acknowledging his faith in the god but also recognizing the difficulty in understanding its will. He feared betraying the god's will due to his lack of understanding. Thus, he pondered earnestly on the meaning of his vision, determined to unravel its significance. To Rakrak's surprise, he didn't have to ponder the meaning of his vision for long. A large group emerged on the horizon, clarifying why the altar had shaken. It was a warning of their enemy's arrival. Upon closer inspection, there was no doubt that these individuals were the ones who had previously expelled them. The leader, bearing blue scales like them, and accompanied by a large monster only he could tame, solidified their recognition. Judging by their numbers, it appeared the entire tribe had arrived, indicating that their homeland, a wetland with green leather, had been completely devastated. This realization infuriated Rakrak. Jael speculated that the large monster must have been high maintenance, depleting their resources at an accelerated rate. However, they remained confident that their sanctuary would remain hidden, nestled in terrain invisible until one climbed up. There was a possibility that the approaching tribe might pass by without notice. Unfortunately, their hopes were dashed when the patrol, led by Ur, exposed their presence by boldly confronting the approaching tribe. Ur warned them to halt their advance, declaring that the sanctuary belonged to the nameless beetle avatar and demanding they take no further steps on their turf. However, rather than deterring the approaching tribe, Ur's bold actions only fueled their curiosity. Even Rakrak couldn't fathom the stupidity of Ur's move. Nonetheless, he reassured Jael not to worry, suggesting that this might be part of God's arrangement. Jael, confused, asked for clarification. Rakrak explained his belief that God deliberately orchestrated the situation. Jael assumed he meant it was a test from God, but Rakrak clarified that it might not be a test but rather a mission to accept and save those who were once part of their community. Despite Rakrak's optimism, Jael remained concerned, knowing all too well the ruthlessness of their previous tribe's leader, who had driven out the weaker members without a second thought. As they contemplated their predicament, the blue butterfly appeared once more in front of Rakrak, a clear sign of God's will. With this, Rakrak realized the folly of speculating about the future. Instead, they needed to focus on what they could control, facing their adversaries head-on. Meanwhile, Nebula was pleased to see that Rakrak understood the gravity of the situation. The tribes of Rakrak and the Blue Hide tribe must unite for the sake of population growth and technological advancement. What struck Nebula as strange, however, was that Rakrak made this decision on his own. Nebula perceived Rakrak's decisive action as a reflection of his strong willpower, a trait that Nebula deemed favorable in a leader. Nebula wished for Rakrak to develop a firm belief, as it would grant Nebula greater control and enable him to express his intentions more effectively. However, Nebula understood that such developments would require time and a higher level of influence. For the time being, Nebula resolved to focus on the impending battle. As expected, the cunning leader of the Blue Lizard Men sought to exploit the stupidity of Rakrak's tribe by extracting information through manipulation. With each taunt, Yur's group unwittingly divulged more about their sanctuary. However, just as the Blue leader thought he had gained the upper hand, an unexpected arrival intervened. With confidence and conviction, Rakrak revealed the presence of an avatar in their sanctuary, displaying leadership qualities that commanded respect. Surprised by Rakrak's sudden assertiveness, the Blue leader ceased his mockery and inquired about the meaning of an avatar. Rakrak explained that their sanctuary belonged to the domain of the nameless beetle avatar. The Blue leader, skeptical of Rakrak's claims about the nameless beetle avatar, dismissed them as delusional. With renewed arrogance, he looked down upon Rakrak's tribe once more, demanding their immediate departure while arrogantly asserting his superiority. His disdain even extended to their mount, treating them with contempt. Asserting his dominance, he boasted of his numerous followers and confidently declared their inevitable defeat. Surprised by Rakrak's defiance, the Blue leader was taken aback when Rakrak aimed his spear towards him, indicating his willingness to engage in combat. Before the Blue leader could react, Rakrak redirected his attention to the followers of the Blue leader, attempting to reason with them. He extended an invitation for them to join his tribe, promising them care and protection under God's watchful eye. The Blue leader's laughter echoed hysterically as he dismissed Rakrak's words as nonsense. From his perspective, there was no point in further conversation, as he deemed them all fools. Rakrak, however, defiantly countered, asserting that the Blue leader did not understand God and pointing out the sharpness of his spear. Taken aback, the Blue leader was more concerned by Rakrak's apparent madness than the sharpness of the spear. Deciding to end the confrontation, the Blue leader launched an attack. Meanwhile, Rakrak prayed to his god for courage and strength to overcome his enemy. However, to his dismay, his spear shattered upon impact, leaving him defenseless and frozen in fear. Before the final blow could land, a system interface appeared in front of Nebula, indicating a significant increase in experience points for both tribes due to their encounter. Furthermore, as Nebula had been closely monitoring one tribe, they were now both part of his territory. Seizing the opportunity, Nebula activated a new skill without hesitation. With a bright beam of light descending upon him, Rakrak found himself infused with a surge of mana. United with Nebula's consciousness, he dodged the incoming attack with newfound agility and power. Meanwhile, the Blue leader remained clueless about the turn of events as he attempted to attack Rakrak once more. However, Nebula, occupying Rakrak's body, regarded the attack with indifference, finding the movements of their opponent sluggish. This afforded Nebula the opportunity to assess the Blue leader's strength, discovering that Rakrak alone could overpower him. The only obstacle to Rakrak's victory was the small drake monster accompanying the Blue leader, boasting 87 strength beyond Rakrak's own. Yet, with Nebula's blessing, this obstacle became surmountable. Utilizing the newfound skill Strong Avatar, Nebula dashed toward the drake, catching it off guard with his speed. Thanks to the additional stat of divinity provided by the skill, Rakrak's power surged to 630. With ease, Nebula dispatched the drake, slamming it into the ground with force that stunned onlookers. The overwhelming disparity in power left even Rakrak's own tribe members, accustomed to his strength, in disbelief. A stunned silence fell over the scene as everyone struggled to comprehend the incredible display of power. With the threat eliminated, Rakrak's men were on the brink of celebration. However, despite Rakrak's indifference, the celebration came to an abrupt halt. Meanwhile, the Blue adversary found himself in disbelief, unable to accept his defeat. Convinced that his calculations had never failed him, he could only surmise that Rakrak had resorted to underhanded tactics. Determined to regain his honor, he launched another attack. Unbeknownst to him, Nebula still wielded control over Rakrak's body and cared little for the Blue adversary's futile efforts. With a decisive strike, Nebula dispatched the blue adversary, leaving his lifeless body with a twisted neck. Following this chilling display of power, Nebula coldly invited the others to challenge him, though none dared to do so. Relinquishing their weapons, they swore allegiance to Rakrak and his tribe. With their submission evident, Nebula departed Rakrak's body, allowing Rakrak to regain consciousness. Despite his awakening, Rakrak struggled to comprehend the events that had transpired, feeling as though he were trapped in a dream with the Avatar now inhabiting his body. As night fell once more, the paradise they inhabited seemed more alive than ever, with the lizard men celebrating their newfound unity. Amidst the festivities, conversations buzzed about the transformation of the tribe and its newfound strength under the guidance of the nameless beetle Avatar. Had this not occurred, they would have perished wandering aimlessly in the wilderness. Through this tale, the newfound tribe members now comprehend the formidable power of the Avatar, even witnessing their leader's unparalleled strength. Amidst these revelations, Rakrak found himself sitting with Jael, lost in contemplation. Jael's interruption brought him back to the present, questioning the sustainability of their current situation. With the acceptance of the newcomers, their population had expanded sixfold, placing a strain on their environment. Rakrak, aware of the impending deterioration, had been silently pondering their predicament. The only viable solution seemed to be leaving their current location, a notion that surprised Jael, who feared aimless wandering in the wilderness. However, Rakrak assured him otherwise, expressing a deep conviction that the answers they sought lay within themselves, transmitted by the divine wisdom of their elders.